We're going to begin with a short introduction, which we're going to explore more fully in March next year, where we'll be looking at some answers. And we're flagging up Tony Benn's 1992 Commonwealth Bill. So our first speaker then is Mike Davis, editor of Chartist magazine, as Carol has already said. So I'm going to hand back to Carol, who is chairing this short beginning from Mike, who's going to flag up really what we're going to be looking at in more detail next year, the question of a Commonwealth.
We're going to go to Mike. We, as I said before, we're very delighted to have Mike because he's the editor of the Chartist magazine. As we probably many of you know, the Chartists were the people who in the 1830s put forward 6 points for electoral reform, and I'm pleased to say that eventually all of them have been granted except for one, and that is to have annual elections for Parliament, but all the rest have been granted. So I'll say no more, but to hand over to Mike Davis.
Thank you very much, Carol. I guess you can hear me now. Yes. Yeah, just to add to that, Chartist really came in for a bit of flack some years ago for having an old-fashioned name, but in fact, I think it's a name that's of its time because it reminds people of the unfinished democratic revolution in Britain, in England, and the need for some fundamental changes, of which obviously the abolition of the monarchy and the introduction of an accountable head of state is but one. We've also been majoring on support for Labour for a New Democracy, which has campaigned heavily for PR and electoral reform, which is another feature I think many of us will probably agree needs to happen to transform democracy in the UK. But Steve's asked me just to talk about Tony Benn and the Commonwealth of Britain Bill. And what I'm going to do is a quick canter through some historical features of the largely absence of debate in the Labour Party over its 120 years of existence. And then having done that quick canter, to outline some of the features of Benn's Commonwealth of Britain Bill. And I understand there won't be discussion today, but at least it will sow some seeds for future discussion. And of course, we've been reminded again this week, I was just reading, I'm sure many of us this morning have read Andy Burnham and other Northern Labour mayors' comments about the fact that millions are going to the Duchy of Lancaster when people die intestate, another feature of another reason why these feudal remnants need to be exposed, challenged and removed. Anyway, start with a quote. "The life of one Welsh miner is of greater commercial and moral value to the British nation than the whole royal crowd put together, from the royal great-grandmama to the puling great-grandchild." So this was Keir Hardie, first leader of the Labour Party, speaking in the House of Commons in 1894. He was objecting to lavish celebrations on the birth of the future Edward VIII and the complete absence of any acknowledgement of the deaths of 251 Welsh miners in a terrible mining accident in South Wales the same day. For Hardie's efforts in Parliament, he was howled down. He remained a Republican, exposing financial links between Cecil Rhodes' South African mining enterprises and King Edward VII. Here's another Labour MP's 1907 denunciation of the King's meeting with the hated Russian Tsar in the Baltic, which Hardie said virtually condoned the atrocities of the Tsarist regime in Russia. And his attacks on the King's privileged and debauched lifestyle in opposition to the First World War, he maintained until his death in 1915. Labour under Ramsay MacDonald, his successor, and other leaders, apart from George Lansbury, failed to embrace Hardy's socialist republicanism. Although there's always been a strain of republicanism running through the party, it's never managed to advocate an official policy of republicanism in its history, even in the socialist high point, quote unquote, 1945. The only time Labour Party conference has ever discussed the abolition of the monarchy was in 1923. The delegate from Stockton and Thornaby Labour Party moved a resolution that the royal family is no longer necessary as part of the British Constitution, and the Labour Party is asked to state definitively its view on the matter. It was seconded by a delegate from Shoreditch Trades Council, who called the monarchy an anachronism. The vote was lost by 3,694,000 to 386,000. Even old George Lansbury, who was a Republican, opposed it, saying that what was the point of bothering about this now? Anyway, in 1908, Keir Hardie was banned from Edward VII's Royal Garden Party. Ever since, though, Labour Party Labour leaders have been invited to the garden parties. There were a few mavericks, like the Labour MP for Hamilton, Willie Hamilton, who replaced the communist Willie Gallagher. He opposed the royal levy and payments for jubilees from the public purse. And of course, Tony Benn, the ex-Lord Stansgate, who renounced his peerage. Benn was the Labour Party's longest-serving MP from 1950 to 2001, when he decided not to stand again and devote, quotes, more time to politics. He proposed a Commonwealth of Britain Bill in 1991. The essence of the bill proposes a democratic, secular, federal Commonwealth comprising the nations of England, Scotland and Wales, and dedicated to the maintenance of the welfare of its citizens. For any bill to be debated in Parliament requires the royal assent. Ironically, in this case, it was granted on the 25th of June, 1991. It's been moved several times between that date and today, but it's never got a second reading. So what does the bill propose? There are 10 major elements. First, the constitutional status of the Crown is ended. Second, the Church of England is disestablished. Third, the head of state is to be the president elected by a joint sitting of both houses of the Commonwealth Parliament. 4, the functions of the royal prerogative are transferred to Parliament. 5th, the Privy Council is abolished and replaced by a Council of State. 6, the House of Lords be replaced by an elected House of the People with equal representation of men and women. The House of Commons, number 7, this, should have equal male-female representation. 8, England, Scotland and Wales should have their own parliaments. 9, county court judges and magistrates should be elected. And finally, British jurisdiction over Northern Ireland should be ended. So let's just spend 2 or 3 more minutes on several of those points before I finish. Whatever the ideologies embraced by the ruling party or parties, human rights must be respected. Freedom of speech, assembly and association, religious faith, the right to vote, right to privacy, freedom from surveillance, and freedom of information. Secondly, that all power should be accountable, all political power should be democratically elected. So on the ending of the monarchy, the king, as he is now, would have no legal status and would become a private citizen. The ex-monarch and all the family would work and pay taxes, as in most European states. Family parties, births and deaths would be paid for from their own pockets. Equally, the monarchy would be freed from the burden of state duties. Other features, the vote would also be extended to everyone over the age of 16. This is still quite a radical proposal. On the grounds that 16-year-olds can work and pay taxes, get married and join the armed forces. Each parliament would run for a fixed term of 4 years, and voting would be by residence qualification. Ending patronage, all personal titles and ranks would cease. Those elected to the House of the People would replace all titles. He also proposed that there be a referendum should the bill be successful, and this would be achieved by putting it out to the people. Ben argued that the practical and moral reasons for demanding greater democracy, that no system of government can hope to survive over a long period without a high and continuing degree of consent. He used the example of the collapse of the Soviet communist system in 1991 and argues the centralization of capitalism, its power and wealth, is leading to a similar lack of consent. Quotes, "Without consent, public hostility grows until the system collapses or is overthrown. Consent also enables the people to dismiss government without bloodshed." Now, all this can be read up in a book by Ben and Andrew Hood called The Common Sense, A New Constitution for Britain. Couple more points before I finish. The royal prerogative is worth mentioning. Since William the Conqueror in 1066, who vowed to rule over the whole people subject to me, this has been the situation. The nationalisation of the Church of England was affected by royal prerogative under Henry VIII, and the Royal Mail was similarly established in 1660 by Charles II. These powers were ended by the Commonwealth in the period 1649 to 60, reinstated and then modified by the Glorious Revolution in 1688, when Parliament allegedly invited William and Mary to replace James II. Anyway, these powers remain immense in scope and supersede many of the powers of the elected Commons. The Crown can dissolve Parliament and can ask an individual to form a government. It was used to go to war in the Falklands and the First World War and the First Gulf War. The last time the royal prerogative was used to dismiss a government was that of Gough Whitlam's Labour government in Australia in 1975. So under Benn's bill, the prerogative powers would be transferred to Parliament, so statute law would be substituted for the arbitrary administrative acts of the King's First Minister. All the rights and duties of the British people stem from the powers of the Crown, the legal authority of the state residing in the monarchy. That would all go. Currently, judges owe their allegiance to the Crown, not Parliament. The courts would no longer be Crown versus, but the people or Parliament versus. And the executive powers of the state to sign treaties, to make state appointments, to go to war, currently do not derive from democratic constitution, but are Crown prerogatives. These would revert to Parliament. Finally, disestablishment of the Church of England. I'll just touch on that one. Since no religion or any branch of Christianity would be favoured, so the Church of England would go as the established religion. The absurdity of Church of England bishops being appointed by Parliament would end. The Church would be free to select its own hierarchy. Changes to the prayer book and the reading of daily prayers in the House of Commons would be terminated. These matters would be restored to the Church, and the state would be separate from religion. This is a huge anachronism today, given that the C of E is a minority religion in the population of the whole. So to finish, I've cut out one or two other features of the bill for the future conference. Rights and the Constitution have always been a weak flank of the socialist left in the UK. There's been a tendency to concentrate on economic and social to the exclusion or diminishing of the political and the constitutional. Hence, in part, the failure to challenge capitalist structures and methods of running nationalised industries and to interrogate the deeper recesses of power and control in British society. But issues of political process, democracy and rights should be seen as equally important in the programmatic activity of socialists. Sadly, only the Green Party has republicanism in its programme. I'm very pleased that we have this new forum that's looking at republicanism, and Labour has now recently had a new group formed called Labour for a Republic, which I would hope perhaps links might be made over the next period. Okay, so that's a brief canter through a very short history of Labour and republicanism and Benn's bill, which, as I say, has languished, never getting a second reading. Perhaps one day, I'm not optimistic under Comrade Starmer, but under another day, it might see the second reading. Thanks for listening.